What if one dog could change everything? Milo's journey from fear to freedom is more than just a story. It's a reminder that no matter how broken we are, we all have the power to heal and fight for a better tomorrow. Milo's paws throbbed as he padded along the icy streets, each step a small battle against the bitter cold. His breath rose in misty puffs, vanishing into the frigid night air. Hunger gnawed at his belly, but survival had taught him to prioritize one thing at a time. Tonight, his mission was clear: find shelter. Turning into a narrow alleyway, the dim glow of a street lamp revealed a dumpster overflowing with discarded food. Milo approached cautiously, his nose twitching at the scent of half-eaten sandwiches and greasy scraps. It wasn't much, but it was enough to fuel him for another day. What Milo didn't know was that he was being watched. From the shadows of a small convenience store, an older man named Dean peered out, bundled in a thick coat and scarf. Dean had lived in the town for decades and had seen plenty of strays, but there was something about Milo that held his gaze. The dog moved with a cautious dignity, his eyes darting to every corner, forever expecting the worst. Dean had a soft spot for creatures who had known hardship. Without thinking twice, he grabbed a leftover roast chicken from his store's counter and stepped outside. "Hey there, buddy," he called softly, his voice barely carrying over the wind. "You hungry?" Milo froze. Instinct screamed at him to run, but the gentleness in Dean's voice rooted him to the spot. His head turned slightly, ears perked, and his tail gave the faintest, uncertain wag. Encouraged, Dean crouched low, placing the chicken on the ground, before backing away to give Milo space. Slowly, hesitantly, Milo crept forward, his nose quivering. Within moments, he was devouring the meal, glancing up at Dean between hurried bites, his body still tense with distrust. Over the next few days, an unspoken bond began to form. Dean made a habit of leaving food outside at the same time each evening, and Milo, wary but curious, learned to trust the quiet man who never made sudden moves or raised his voice. Though Milo still shied away from touch, he started lingering longer after each meal, sitting a few feet away, while Dean spoke to him in a low, soothing murmur. One evening, as Milo finished his meal, something shifted. Tentatively, he took a cautious step closer. Dean, sensing the importance of the moment, held perfectly still. Milo sniffed the air, then, ever so carefully, pressed his nose against Dean's outstretched hand. It was a small gesture, but it changed everything. Dean, a widower with no children, found a quiet kind of solace in Milo's presence. He laid out a bed of blankets behind the shop, hoping the dog would use it on cold nights. Slowly but surely, Milo accepted the offering. For the first time in years, he felt a kind of warmth that went deeper than the skin. Dean often wondered about Milo's past. The scars on the dog's body, and deeper, in his soul, spoke volumes, but Dean never pressed. He didn't demand affection or try to tame him. He simply offered steady kindness, patient and unyielding, allowing Milo to heal on his own terms. As the months passed, Milo's coat grew glossier, his eyes brighter. He began accompanying Dean on daily walks to the edge of town, where laughing children would sometimes wave as they passed. Milo still flinched at sudden movements, but little by little his confidence returned. The bond between them, born of loneliness and stitched together with trust, deepened. Then, on a crisp spring morning, something unexpected happened. As they strolled along their usual route, Milo suddenly halted, his body tense, his nose twitching furiously at the air. His gaze locked onto a figure approaching down the road. Dean followed Milo's stare and frowned. A man was walking toward them, his clothes ragged, his eyes shifting nervously from side to side. Milo's tail, which had been wagging moments earlier, stiffened. A low growl rumbled deep in his throat, a sound Dean had never heard from him before. Dean instinctively placed a steadying hand on Milo's head, stepping protectively closer. The man's eyes landed on Milo. He stopped dead in his tracks. "Milo," he called out hesitantly, disbelief thick in his voice. Dean felt Milo stiffen beneath his hand, the dog's growl deepening into a warning rumble. In an instant, Dean understood exactly who this man must be. Milo's former owner. The man stepped closer, hand outstretched as if to seize the dog, but Milo was no longer the broken, terrified animal who had fled 2 years ago. With a fierce bark, Milo lunged forward, positioning himself firmly between Dean and the approaching figure. The cold winter air cut like a blade through the desolate streets of the rural town as dusk melted into the creeping shadows. A lone dog limped cautiously along the road, his fur matted, his eyes weighed down by a sorrow far beyond his years. His name was Milo, a scruffy mutt who had endured more hardship in his short life than most creatures should ever have to bear. Once Milo had known better days. He had been a beloved pet, cradled in warmth, cared for by gentle hands. But those memories had long since faded, replaced by darker recollections of cruelty, of fear, of abandonment. 2 years earlier, Milo's owner had been a man named Tanner. Once kind-hearted, Tanner's demeanor had soured after losing his job. His frustration and bitterness festered, and with nowhere else to aim his anger, he turned it onto Milo. The blows, the shouting, the days left hungry, it all piled up until the bright spark in Milo's eyes dimmed, and his once wagging tail drooped in defeat. Yet somehow, Milo's spirit never fully shattered. Somewhere deep inside, a flicker of hope still burned. One night, after a particularly violent outburst, Milo found the strength to break free. With only the biting wind to accompany him, he ran, fast and far, away from the only home he'd ever known. For days, Milo roamed aimlessly, scavenging for scraps, seeking shelter under crumbling bridges. His body bore the scars of his past, but in his eyes lingered the stubborn glow of survival. What Milo didn't know was that fate had more in store for him. His path would soon cross with that of a kind stranger, one who would offer him a second chance at the life he deserved. And the most incredible chapter of Milo's journey, the one no one could have predicted, was still yet to unfold. Back at the shop, police officers swept through the dim interior, their flashlights slicing through the gloom. Dean recounted everything, his voice steady, even as adrenaline still coursed through his veins. Milo sat glued to his side, his eyes fixed firmly on the door, alert for any sign of Tanner's return. The officers assured Dean they would patrol the area and keep watch, but their reassurances felt thin against the worry gnawing in Dean's chest. After they left, Dean double-checked the locks and knelt beside Milo, running a comforting hand through the dog's fur. "It's over, buddy," he murmured, though deep down he wasn't sure he believed it. Milo leaned into his touch, offering a rare, vulnerable moment of trust. The next morning, Dean decided it was time to act. He called a longtime friend, Karen, who worked at an animal shelter in a neighboring town. She was a fierce advocate for animal welfare, and if anyone would know how to protect Milo, it was her. After hearing the story, Karen didn't hesitate. "You need to get Milo microchipped and officially registered in your name," she said. "That way, if Tanner tries anything, you'll have legal proof that Milo is yours." Dean agreed immediately and scheduled an appointment at the shelter. The process was quick and easy until Karen scanned Milo. A strange look crossed her face. "What's wrong?" Dean asked, his stomach twisting into knots. Karen hesitated. "Milo already has a microchip," she said quietly. "It's registered to someone from 2 years ago, Tanner Thompson." Dean felt the blood drain from his face. "What does that mean?" he asked, his voice low. "Does it give him a legal claim?" Karen exhaled slowly. "Not necessarily. It depends on the state. In cases of documented neglect or abuse, courts almost always side with the current caregiver, especially when the animal is clearly thriving. But this complicates things. If Tanner wanted to fight, he could make a case." The words hit Dean like a punch. He had worked so hard to give Milo a safe, loving home. The idea of Tanner barging back into their lives was unbearable, but Karen wasn't done. "I'll get in touch with a lawyer who specializes in animal custody cases," she promised. "We'll make sure Milo's story is documented. If it comes to a legal fight, we'll be ready." Feeling a swirl of relief and apprehension, Dean thanked Karen and headed home with Milo. That evening, as they sat by the fire, Dean couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that their troubles weren't over. Milo, sensing Dean's unease, rested his head in the man's lap, his soft, trusting eyes silently offering comfort. Days melted into weeks and life slowly began to resemble normalcy. Dean resumed his daily walks with Milo, steering clear of the area where they had once crossed paths with Tanner. Milo, ever perceptive, seemed to pick up on the shift in Dean's mood. He stayed closer, more alert, his keen senses sweeping their surroundings. Despite the lingering tension, their bond only deepened. Then one crisp autumn morning, a letter arrived in Dean's mailbox. The envelope was plain, but the return address sent a jolt through Dean's chest. It was from a law firm. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it. Inside was a formal notice from Tanner's lawyer claiming that Milo was Tanner's rightful property and demanding his return. The letter was a web of half-truths and omissions, painting Tanner as a heartbroken owner who had lost his beloved companion through nothing but misfortune. There was no mention of the bruises, no mention of the fear, no mention of the scars etched into Milo's body and soul. Dean immediately called Karen, who answered on the first ring. She wasn't surprised. "This is why we documented everything," she said firmly. "Stay calm, Dean. We'll fight this." Things escalated quickly. Tanner filed a legal complaint, and within days, Dean found a court summons staring up at him from the kitchen table. The thought of standing in front of a judge, battling for Milo's future, filled Dean with a heavy dread. But as he glanced across the room at the dog sleeping peacefully on his bed, a quiet determination settled over him. Milo wasn't just a pet, he was family. Dean ran a hand through his hair, the court summons clutched in his other hand. His mind churned with anger, fear, and resolve. He looked at Milo and spoke, his voice low but steady. "We're not going to lose this, buddy. I promise." That evening, Dean met with Karen and the attorney she had recommended, a sharp, empathetic woman named Hazel Collins. Hazel had seen her share of cases like this, and she wasted no time laying it out. "The courts care most about the animal's welfare," she said. "If we can show evidence of neglect or abuse, Tanner doesn't stand a chance." Hazel outlined their battle plan. Photos documenting Milo's recovery, veterinary records, testimonies from witnesses who had seen Tanner's treatment of the dog. Karen had already started gathering names, neighbors, shelter workers, people who had encountered Milo during his days as a stray, each carrying a piece of the story they needed to tell. Over the following weeks, Dean poured his heart into preparing for the case. He assembled every photo he had ever taken of Milo, each one a testament to the dog's transformation from a broken stray into a vibrant companion. Karen helped collect medical records, detailing Milo's injuries and the slow journey back to health. Every page, every image, every testimony strengthened their case. Despite the stress, Dean tried to maintain a sense of normalcy for Milo. They still took their daily walks, though Dean's eyes never stopped scanning the streets, vigilant for any sign of trouble. Milo, ever intuitive, often nudged Dean's hand or wagged his tail as if reassuring him, "It's okay, we've got this." One evening, as Dean sat hunched over a pile of court documents, a sudden knock at the door jolted him upright. His heart pounded as he approached, half expecting to see Tanner standing on the porch. Instead, a young woman, no older than her 20s, stood holding a stack of papers. "Hi, are you Dean?" she asked, her voice nervous but determined. "My name's Emily. I'm Tanner's niece." Dean stiffened, uncertain. "What do you want?" Emily shifted awkwardly, her gaze dropping to the ground before meeting his. "I heard about the case," she said, "and I want to help. My uncle, Tanner, he doesn't deserve Milo back." Dean's surprise quickly gave way to guarded suspicion. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked cautiously. "Why go against your own family?" Tears shimmered in ember eyes. "Because Milo doesn't deserve to go back to that life," she said, her voice breaking. "I saw what my uncle did to him. I tried to stop it, but Tanner wouldn't listen when Milo ran away. I prayed he'd find a better life. Looks like he did." Emily handed him the stack of papers she had been clutching. "These are statements from neighbors who witnessed the abuse. And there's a video too. I don't know if it'll be enough, but I had to try." Dean's hands trembled slightly as he accepted the documents, his throat tightening with emotion. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough with gratitude. "You have no idea how much this means." Emily offered a faint smile. "Take care of him," she said softly, then turned and walked away, leaving Dean standing on the porch with a weighty mix of gratitude and determination. That night, Dean and Hazel sat together, reviewing the new evidence Emily had provided. The video, captured by a neighbor's security camera, was damning. It showed Tanner dragging Milo by the collar, shouting obscenities while the dog cowered in terror. Hazel's jaw tightened as she watched. "This is exactly what we needed," she said, her voice cold with resolve. "It's undeniable proof of neglect." The court date arrived faster than Dean had expected. As he and Hazel approached the courthouse, a knot of anxiety tightened in his chest. He glanced down at Milo, who sat obediently at his side, his leash held loosely in Dean's hand. "We've got this, buddy," Dean whispered, drawing strength from the dog's calm, steady presence. Inside the courtroom, Tanner sat beside his lawyer, a sharp, stern-looking man in a tailored suit. Tanner avoided looking at Dean, his face twisted with a mix of defiance and unease. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with steel-grey hair and an air of authority, called the court to order and motioned for Hazel to begin. Hazel spoke with clarity and conviction, detailing Milo's journey from fear and injury to health and happiness under Dean's care. She presented their evidence one by one: veterinary records, heartfelt witness testimonies, and finally, the devastating video Emily had uncovered. Each piece of evidence built a story that could not be denied. When Tanner took the stand, he tried to paint himself as a man who had merely made mistakes, claiming frustration had driven his actions, but that he had always loved Milo. His words, however, rang hollow against the flood of proof laid out before the court. Even Ember testimony, calm but cutting, turned the tide firmly against him. The judge listened without betraying her thoughts. When both sides had finished, she called a brief recess before delivering her verdict. Dean sat in the hallway with Milo, the court summons crumpled in his hand, his heart pounding in his chest. The thought of losing Milo was unbearable, but when he looked into the dog's gentle eyes, he found a flicker of hope. No matter what happened next, Dean knew he had fought with everything he had. Back inside, the courtroom grew silent as the judge adjusted her glasses and began to speak. "In reviewing the evidence presented," she said, her voice firm and steady, "it is clear that Mr. Tanner Thompson exhibited a pattern of neglect and abuse toward Milo. The veterinary records, the witness statements, and the video evidence leave no doubt as to the conditions this animal endured. Therefore, I hereby rule that Mr. Joseph Carter is the rightful and legal owner of Milo. Mr. Thompson's claim of custody is denied." Relief crashed over Dean like a wave. He knelt to scratch Milo behind the ears, his voice breaking with emotion. "We did it, buddy," he whispered. Across the room, Tanner's face twisted into a mask of rage. He stood abruptly, slamming his hands against the table. "This isn't over," he snarled, pointing a shaking finger at Dean. "You'll regret this." The judge's gavel came down sharply. "Mr. Thompson, leave the courtroom quietly or face contempt charges," she warned. Tanner's lawyer reached for him, trying to intervene, but Tanner shrugged him off and stormed out, the door slamming shut behind him. The tension in the room lingered even after he was gone. Hazel leaned closer to Dean, her voice low and serious. "We've won this battle," she said, "but be careful. People like him, they don't always let things go." Dean nodded, the joy of their victory dampened by a new, simmering fear. In the days that followed, Dean tried to ease back into normal life. He and Milo found new trails to explore, further from town, hoping distance would bring peace. But Tanner's parting threat echoed in Dean's mind, an unwelcome shadow he couldn't shake. One evening, as Dean locked up his shop, he noticed a car parked across the street. It was unfamiliar, and the driver never got out, just sat there, watching. A chill ran down Dean's spine. Was it Tanner, or someone else he had sent? Dean debated calling the police, but decided to wait, watching from behind the blinds. After several tense hours, the car finally pulled away into the night, but the sense of unease lingered. Dean told Karen about the incident, and she didn't hesitate. "I'm calling the police," she said. "They need to know what's going on." The local officers took Dean's report seriously, promising to increase patrols around the shop and his home. Still, the fear remained. Dean found himself triple-checking the locks and keeping Milo close by his side whenever they stepped outside. Milo, always perceptive, became even more vigilant. He barked at unfamiliar noises and positioned himself protectively between Dean and anyone new they encountered. His loyalty was comforting, but also a constant reminder that they were still living under threat. Then one night, as Dean was closing up the shop, he heard something, a faint clatter behind the building, the shuffle of feet, the scrape of metal. Milo growled low, his muscles tense. Dean grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside cautiously. Milo pressed close to his side. The beam of light sliced through the darkness. At first, nothing, but then movement, a shadow darting behind the dumpster. "Who's there?" Dean called out, forcing his voice to stay steady despite the adrenaline surging through him. No answer. Milo barked furiously, lunging toward the noise. Dean tightened his grip on the leash. "Show yourself!" Slowly, a figure emerged from behind the dumpster, hands raised, eyes wide with fear. A teenager, maybe 16 years old, his clothes dirty and his face pale. "I wasn't doing anything," the boy stammered. "I swear." Dean lowered the flashlight slightly but kept his guard up. "What are you doing back here?" he asked, his voice firm. The boy hesitated, shuffling his feet before muttering, "I was just looking for food." Dean's initial wariness softened. Up close, the boy's gaunt frame and ragged clothes spoke of hardship that no teenager should have to face. "Are you homeless?" Dean asked gently. The boy nodded, his eyes flickering nervously toward Milo, who had stopped barking but remained watchful. Dean sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Come on inside," he said, jerking his head toward the shop. "I'll get you something to eat." The boy hesitated a moment longer, then followed. Still, a gnawing feeling tugged at Dean's gut. Was the kid telling the truth, or had Tanner somehow sent him? Either way, Dean wasn't about to turn a hungry kid away. Inside, Dean prepared a plate of food and set it down. The boy devoured it hungrily, barely pausing for breath. "Thank you," the boy whispered, his voice hoarse. "I didn't." The words cut off as a new noise filled the air, the sudden screech of tires on gravel. Dean stiffened instantly, exchanging a look with Milo, who was already on alert. "Stay here," Dean said quickly to the boy. He moved toward the door, Milo at his heels, heart hammering in his chest. Out in the dark, headlights swept across the alley, then disappeared. Dean didn't wait. He scooped up his keys, grabbed his phone, and called out to the boy. "Come on, we have to move now." Without questioning, the boy obeyed, following Dean out the back door and into his truck. Milo leapt into the back seat, growling low under his breath as Dean gunned the engine and tore away from the shop. Inside the truck, the world blurred into streaks of darkness and distant streetlights. Milo lay sprawled across the back seat, his sides heaving with shallow breaths, tense but ready. Dean kept his eyes glued to the rearview mirror, scanning for headlights. Beside him, the boy, Evan, sat hunched forward, clutching Dean's phone like a lifeline. Neither spoke for a long time, the rumble of the engine the only sound between them. Finally, Dean broke the silence, his voice low and steady. "You did good tonight, Evan. Real good." Evan gave a small, uncertain nod, but the worry didn't leave his face. "Will it be enough?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Dean glanced over at him, then back at the road. "It will be," he said firmly. "We've got the evidence. Now it's up to Hazel and the police." They pulled into the lot behind Dean's shop. The tension inside the truck, thick and unrelenting. Dean killed the engine. The sudden silence made Milo lift his head, ears perked. "Let's go," Dean said, ushering Evan inside quickly. He double-checked the locks on every door and window before finally allowing himself a shallow breath of relief. Under the dim lights of the shop, they laid out the night's haul. Photos, grim, undeniable photos, dogfights, blood-stained ledgers, names, dates, cash exchanges, all carefully documented. Enough not just to shut Tanner down, but to see him rot in a prison cell. Evan sat on the battered old couch, rubbing his hands together anxiously. Milo curled up near him, offering quiet, steadfast comfort. "What if he comes after us?" Evan whispered. Dean crouched down to meet the boy's eyes. "Then we'll be ready," he said firmly, "and we're not alone anymore. Hazel's bringing the police in. Tanner won't be able to touch us once they have this." Evan nodded slowly. For the first time since they'd met, a spark of hope flickered in the boy's weary eyes. That night, Dean barely slept. Every creak of the old building, every gust of wind against the windows set his nerves on edge. Milo dozed lightly at his feet, his ears twitching with every sound. At dawn, Hazel arrived, her expression tight with determination. Dean handed her his phone, and together they went over the evidence again. Hazel's face hardened with each new photo she saw. "This is more than enough," she said finally, closing the folder. "With Evan's testimony and this evidence, we'll not only dismantle Tanner's operation, we'll have him facing serious prison time." Dean let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "When do we move?" he asked. Hazel's eyes sharpened. "Today. The police are securing the warrant now. We're going to end this before Tanner knows what's coming." Evan sat nearby, listening quietly, his hands still fidgeting, but his posture a little straighter than before. Dean placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "You did the right thing, kid," he said. Evan nodded, the fear still there, but now tempered with resolve. As they prepared for what was to come, Dean knew the hardest part was still ahead. They had survived the night. Now they had to survive the fight. Outside, the sun rose higher, casting long golden beams through the shop windows, piercing the darkness at last. Later that morning, as Dean drove Evan across town to a safe place Hazel had arranged, The tension in the truck was still palpable. Dean's voice broke the heavy silence. "You were brave back there, Evan," he said, sincerely. "I couldn't have done it without you." Evan managed a faint smile, though his hands still trembled. "I just kept thinking about all the dogs Tanner's hurt," he said. "If this can stop him, it's worth it." Dean tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "It will stop him," he said. "We have everything we need now." Just as they neared the drop-off point, Dean's phone buzzed in the cup holder. It was Hazel. "Dean, did you get what you needed?" she asked, her voice tight with urgency. "Yeah," Dean answered, keeping his voice steady. "We've got photos of his records, enough to prove everything. I'll send them over as soon as I'm back." Hazel exhaled audibly. "Good. I'm building the case file now, but Dean... ... She paused, and her next words were grim. "Be careful. If Tanner figures out what's happening, he won't hesitate." Dean glanced over at Evan, who stared out the window, his face pale and thoughtful. "I know," Dean said quietly. "We'll lay low for now." But deep down, Dean knew laying low might not be enough. Not with a man like Tanner Thompson, not with everything at stake. After ending the call, Dean pulled into the driveway and killed the engine. The night's heavy quiet wrapped around them, a stark, jarring contrast to the chaos they had just escaped. Inside, Dean set up his laptop to upload the photos while Evan busied himself feeding Milo. The dog wagged his tail eagerly, his bright demeanor a small but vital reminder of what they were fighting for. As the images transferred, Dean noticed the way Evan kept glancing at the doors, his posture rigid with unease. "Hey," Dean said gently. "You did great tonight. Really." Evan shrugged, his face guarded.
"I just hope it's enough. Tanner, he's not the kind of guy who gives up easy." Dean placed a steady hand on the boy's shoulder. "It's enough," he said, "and if he comes for us, we'll be ready." But even as he said it, Dean wasn't sure if he believed it himself. That night, sleep was a stranger. Every creak of the old building, every whisper of the wind outside sounded like a threat. Dean sat in the dim glow of the laptop, Milo's head heavy on his lap, both of them too alert, too wired to truly rest. By morning, Hazel called with news. "They're reviewing the evidence now," she told him. "If everything checks out, and it will, they'll raid Tanner's operation within the week." Relief washed through Dean, but it was tempered by the reality they still faced. Until Tanner was behind bars, they weren't safe. Dean decided he wasn't letting Evan out of his sight. In the days that followed, a quiet rhythm developed between them. They worked side by side, caring for Milo, patching up the shop. In the slow, cautious moments between tasks, Dean learned about the boy who had somehow ended up in his life. Evan loved animals. He had once dreamed of becoming a veterinarian before Tanner's darkness had swallowed up everything bright in his world. "You'd make a great vet," Dean said one evening as they cleaned out the kennels. "You've got the heart for it." Evan gave a shy smile, the first real one Dean had seen. "Maybe someday," Evan said quietly. "If we get through this." Dean met his gaze firmly. "We will, and when we do, you'll have a fresh start." Meanwhile, Milo had clearly made up his mind. Evan was family now. The once cautious dog shadowed Evan everywhere, his loyalty fierce and unshakable. Their bond was a reminder of everything Dean believed in. Second chances, trust hard-won, loyalty earned the hard way. One afternoon, as they repaired a fence out back, the sound of a car rolling into the driveway made Dean stiffen. His hand found a wrench in the toolbox without thinking. But it was Hazel, stepping out with urgency written all over her. "The authorities are moving tonight," she said, her voice low and urgent. "They've got the warrant. Tanner's operation is going down." Dean exchanged a glance with Evan, who swallowed hard. "Does he know?" Dean asked. Hazel hesitated. "It's hard to say, but you need to stay sharp. If he suspects anything, he could lash out." That evening, the sun dipped below the horizon, and Dean locked up the shop with meticulous care. Milo stayed close, his body tense. Evan paced, energy crackling off him in nervous waves. Every shadow beyond the windows felt alive. Hours later, Dean's phone buzzed. It was a message from Hazel. The raid was a success. Tanner's in custody. Dean exhaled a long, shuddering breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "It's over," he said, showing Evan the screen. The boy's shoulders slumped with relief. A real smile broke across his face. Milo barked softly, tail thumping against the floor like a victory drum. Dean crouched down and scratched behind Milo's ears. "We did it, buddy. You're safe now."
But as he looked out into the dark, Dean knew in his gut their journey wasn't truly over. Tanner might be behind bars, but the damage he'd done, the scars he'd left on Milo, on Evan, on so many others, would take far longer to heal. Dean silently vowed to be there for every step of that journey. Later that night, while Evan and Milo huddled quietly in the shelter of the shop, a new threat emerged. Milo's ears pricked up first, low growls vibrating deep in his chest. Evan clung to him, whispering urgently, "Stay quiet, Milo. Dean's counting on us." Back in the front of the shop, Dean caught the glint of movement outside, a shadow too deliberate to be the wind. Without thinking, he dove for the emergency supplies under the counter, grabbing the flare gun. The window shattered inward as heavy boots kicked through. Dean fired the flare through the broken frame. The sudden burst of light and deafening crack startled the intruders, giving Dean precious seconds. Snatching up his phone, Dean dialed Hazel. "They're breaking in," he said, breathless. "We're close," Hazel replied. "Just hold on a little longer." The intruders regrouped quickly. A scarred man kicked fully through the door, stepping inside with a sneer. "End of the line, Dean." Dean braced himself, but he wasn't alone. From the side entrance, Milo burst into the fray, a ferocious blur of muscle and teeth. "Milo, no!" Dean shouted, fear lancing through him. But Milo didn't hesitate. He barreled into the nearest man, knocking him hard to the ground. The chaos bought them precious seconds, seconds they desperately needed. In the distance, sirens wailed, growing louder. Help was almost there. And this time, Dean knew they weren't going down without a fight. The scarred man cursed and signaled his crew. "This isn't over," he snarled, his eyes burning with hate before he vanished into the night. Moments later, police swarmed the scene, their flashing lights cutting through the dark like blades. Officers secured the area, barking orders, gathering statements. Hazel arrived soon after, her face a fierce storm of fury and relief. "You're lucky to be alive," she said, pulling Dean into a hard, shaking hug. Dean's gaze found Milo, who was being gently checked over by an officer. "I owe him my life," Dean said quietly. As the adrenaline bled away, a cold resolve hardened in Dean's chest. They had survived, but the fight wasn't finished. Alan's people had been driven off for now, but they would return unless every last part of his cruel empire was torn down. With Hazel at his side, Dean vowed to see it through, not just for himself, for every soul that had suffered because of Alan's cruelty. The police investigation moved quickly. Officers combed through the wreckage of the shop, collecting evidence. Hazel leveraged her connections, pushing the case forward with relentless focus. "We have enough to press charges against more of Alan's network," she told Dean, fire blazing in her eyes. "This time, we finish it." Dean refused to wait passively. The attack had taught him a brutal lesson. Survival required action. In the days that followed, he fortified the shop, reached out for community support, and deepened his bond with Milo, the dog whose courage had saved them all. Milo, sensing the shift, rarely left Dean's side. At night, he lay curled at the foot of Dean's bed, ears twitching at every whisper of sound. Evan, though still shaken, began to draw strength from Milo's calm presence. Fear slowly gave way to something new, quiet, growing resilience. Then came the breakthrough they'd hoped for. Hazel called with stunning news. "Alan's agreed to cooperate," she said, barely containing her triumph. "He's giving us everything in exchange for a lighter sentence." Dean gripped the phone tighter. Relief surged, but so did caution. "What about the ones who attacked us?" he asked. "They're still running," Hazel admitted, "but it's only a matter of time." That time came sooner than expected. One evening, just as Dean was locking up the shop, Hazel's call came. "We found them," she said. "The task force is moving in tonight. It's over, Dean." Dean hung up, heart pounding. He looked down at Milo, who wagged his tail as if sensing the change. "We did it, buddy," Dean whispered. "We made it." The raid was swift and decisive. Law enforcement stormed the hideout, arresting Alan's associates without a fight. The network, the cruelty, the fear was dismantled for good. When Hazel called to confirm it was over, Dean felt something inside him finally loosen. The real victory, he realized, wasn't just in surviving, it was in the lives they had saved. In the weeks that followed, the town rallied around them. Dean's shop became a symbol of hope. Donations poured in. Volunteers came by the dozens, and Evan, slowly but surely, began to step back into the light. One sunny afternoon, Dean and Evan stood outside, watching children laugh and play with Milo in the yard. "We did it," Dean said, glancing at Evan. "We turned something terrible into something good." Evan smiled, a real smile this time, and nodded. "Milo did it," he said. "He saved us." Dean looked at Milo, stretched out peacefully in the sun, his eyes half closed in contentment. The dog who had once known only fear had found a new life and had given them all a second chance. As the sun dipped low, casting a golden glow over the yard, Dean knelt beside Milo and scratched behind his ears. "You're a good boy, Milo," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. "The best." Milo wagged his tail, a slow, content thump against the grass, their bond unbreakable. In the months that followed, Milo's Haven, the shop's new name, became a beacon. People came from towns away to hear Milo's story, to adopt animals, and to fight cruelty with kindness. Milo, once a symbol of pain, now ran joyfully through the fields, his spirit inspiring everyone he met. Dean and Evan, with Milo at their side, built something beautiful, a place where second chances weren't just offered, they were celebrated. Hazel visited often, pride shining in her eyes. "You gave him a chance, Dean," she said one afternoon, watching Milo romp through the yard. "And look what he gave you back." Dean smiled, his heart full. Milo hadn't just survived, he had led them all to something better. Hazel, now a leading advocate for change, told Milo's story at public hearings. It became a rallying cry, a living testament that one brave act could spark a movement. But for Dean, the true reward was quieter, simpler, and infinitely more precious. On a quiet evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Dean sat on the porch, Milo at his feet, and Evan by his side. The warm light bathed the yard, the gentle breeze carrying the laughter of children playing nearby. It was a moment of peace, proof that even in the deepest darkness, light could prevail. "Dean!" Evan's voice broke the comfortable silence. Dean turned to him, the future wide open before them both. "Yeah," Dean replied, turning toward Evan. "Do you think Milo remembers everything, like how hard it was before?" Dean glanced down at Milo, who was gazing up at him with those deep, trusting eyes. "I think he does," Dean said thoughtfully. "But I also think he chooses to focus on what he has now. He's a survivor, Evan. And survivors, well, they don't forget. They grow." Evan nodded slowly, as if absorbing the weight of Dean's words. He reached down to pat Milo's head, and the dog's tail thumped happily against the porch. "I want to be like him," Evan said softly, almost to himself. "Strong, brave." Dean smiled, his hand ruffling Evan's hair. "You already are." As night settled in, Dean carried the memory of that moment with him, a quiet affirmation that they were on the right path. The journey hadn't been easy, and more challenges were surely ahead. But with Milo at their side, Dean knew they could face whatever came next. The following morning, Dean woke to find Milo sitting by the door, the leash in his mouth, tail wagging with uncontained excitement. The dog's bright eyes seemed to say, "What's next?" Dean chuckled, reaching for the leash and opening the door. "Let's find out, buddy," he said. Together they stepped into the fresh morning air, hearts wide open to whatever the future held. Milo had been given a second chance, and in return, he had given Dean, Evan, and countless others a reason to believe again, in hope, in resilience, and in the unbreakable power of unconditional love. Did Milo's story inspire you? How do you think animals show their love and loyalty? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to hear more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to my channel and hit that like button. Together, let's make the world a better place for animals and for the humans who love them. See you in the next video.